that was imposed in India. And since then, we as a non-profit international NGO have been building bridges between India and UK. We serve as a strong advocate for all matters related to India in the UK. 4 years after passing the historic CAA bill in the Parliament in 2019, the Indian government finally notified this as a law on the 11th of March 2024. Persecuted minorities belonging to six religious classifications, namely Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, Parsis, and Christians who fled persecution of religion in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan, are today living amongst us as refugees. They can finally breathe a sigh of relief and proceed towards embracing themselves as Indian following this law being passed. After the enactment of this law, the Home Minister of India made it clear that there was no going back on the CAA issue. However, the question is, are we educated enough about this act? Over 55 people were killed as a consequence of disinformation, and our role in society is to prevent such activities. The government puts forth an argument that this law is at its core fundamentals, not discriminatory, not exclusionary. So to debate and discuss this particular law, dissect it and clutter and remove all the clutter from this particular law, we today have Sohail Seth with us, a man who juggles wearing a number of hats, most popular of them being a marketing guru, a fierce columnist, and a political commentator. We have Charlotte Littlewood, a good friend and enthusiastic researcher working with the ICFS. And last but not least, you can love him, you can hate him. I don't think you can hate him, but you can certainly not miss him, Abhijit Iyer Mitra. Welcome all. Right, so I'm going to show a bit of my personal bias here, and I'm going to kickstart the discussion with my fellow captain, Sohail Seth, to field a question from a bit of a historical perspective. And Sohail, welcome to this particular chat. Hope you're doing well. So be it in India or the West, politically correct individuals and groups of people have been harping on words like discrimination, exclusionary, etc., with strong arguments of why not the Jews? Why not the homosexuals? Why have you left out the atheists? And they have been making their case against the CAA. In your view, how important are the fissures of partition, the legacy and the failings of the Nehru-Liaquat Pact in paving the way for the CAA? And how would you respond to those critics of this particular law who say that this is essentially anti-Muslim?
So there is no dearth of idiots on this planet. So you have to discount what I call the IF, the idiot factor. So park that on the side. Go into Indian history quickly. 1947 March, the first exodus from West Pakistan to India happens. Those are Hindus returning, or Hindus actually coming to India, as it were, from West Pakistan. In 1948, the second round of exodus begins, where there are Muslims who have left India for Pakistan, seen the shit show that Pakistan is, now want to return to India. In the meantime, what happens? And who's presiding over it? The two favorites of the Congress and the BJP, Pandit Nehru and Sardar Patel. So these are the two guys who are presiding over this whole issue. What is the issue? Very simply put, the first set of people are called displaced. The second set of people are called evacuees. So when these guys go from India to West Pakistan, the Muslims that is, their properties are then given to people who are displaced, who have come in, the Hindus who have come in from West Pakistan. Now, when those Muslims who went there suddenly changed their mind, saw the shit show that Pakistan is, want to come back, they need to have what they call provincial governmental approval. This is all history. I'm not making any of this up. So that's the historical reality. Every country does that because you cannot handle mass migration and reverse migration if you don't put certain rules in place. Why was the provincial government given the option to issue permits? Because where on earth would you house those people? But there was a very important thing that happened. India's partition bore the hallmark of two hypocrisies. Hypocrisy number one, practiced by Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, where he believed that in order to come across as secular, he must appease rather than be neutral. When India was about to unfurl the tricolour on the intervening nights of August 14 and the morning of August 15, Mahatma Gandhi was parked in Noakhali trying to quell riots. So that was number one. Number two, the manner in which the British, other than Charlotte's family, the manner in which the British treated India and left us in disarray created the kind of havoc that no mass exodus of humankind has ever seen, which lay the foundation stones for communalism of the worst kind. Friends and neighbors turned into enemies. Religious nostalgia or religious harmony turned into religious vendetta and religious venom. In such a situation, the government had to act. You couldn't have a situation where Charlotte, who had left India, gone to West Pakistan, suddenly changes her mind, comes back, sees a different India, and sees her role. I mean, I'm just saying, using this as an
A figure of
example,
speech.
her role as so inimical to the society that was at that point in time evolving. But please remember, it was a distrusting society. It was a society which had been totally war torn. And I'm talking about the north of India. The south of India, where Abhijit's one half comes from, has always remained calm, serene, which explains his demeanor of calmness and shanti and all of that. So this is the reality. Now today, whatever Modi has said, see, the beauty about India is half the jokers don't read, and the others who read the wrong things and quote the wrong things. Nothing of the CAA was ever hidden from the people. It was in the Bharatiya Janata Party's manifesto. He has not surprised anyone. If you care to read the manifesto, you would have read that. Number two, is it political? So what? Everything in India is political. If a tap doesn't function, it becomes a political issue. Must be political. So what? Now, in India, there are elections every month, either for the state or for the center. By that logic, no laws can come in, no bills can be passed, no laws can be enacted because you'll always say that you're in election mode. Therefore, this is political grandstanding. Now comes to the question about all these jokers who are saying, oh, but what about the Jews? What about the Ahmadiyas? What about the Rohingyas? What about the kangaroos? What about the penguins? Get everyone in. I mean, we're not Jurassic Park, for God's sake. We're a country. You have to take people who you believe are the most under threat in countries that have declared themselves a religious state. It is the Islamic State of Pakistan. So we are not saying it is the Islamic Republic of India or the Hindu Republic of India, not yet at least. I don't know what these guys have in mind. So we are not saying it's the Hindu Republic of India, for God's sake. A, B, we will of course take in Hindus first where there is absolute persecution. I mean, by that logic, to say a minor sect of a major religion, let's say Islam in this case and the Ahmadiyas, are being persecuted in Pakistan, take them as well. You'll be left with no one here. I mean, already this LGBTQ has already filled in LGBTQ5. Give it another 1 year, you'll have all the alphabets filled. By that logic, you'll be left with no choice but to take everyone. And finally, Adit, it is the prerogative of the government to decide who it gives citizenship to. A, B. If I give you citizenship, that citizenship comes with responsibility on both ends of the spectrum. Responsibility at the government's end, responsibility at my end. Number three, Article 14, what these people have been tom-tomming, becomes applicable once you're a citizen. If you're not a citizen of my country, how the hell does my constitution apply to you?
So no, but doesn't the Article 14 say that irrespective of whether you're a citizen or not, the equality must prevail?
Exactly. But it is not applicable unless you become a citizen of this country. The article is, to my mind, and I've heard Harish also, Salve, speak on this. The article, see, remember, the Constitution of India is in spirit and letter, or letter and spirit, depending on how you choose to word it. So, obviously, if I become a citizen of India, does the Constitution of India apply to me? The Constitution enshrines, for instance, what is secularism? The definition that the Congress party today is using and so-called woke liberals are using of secularism in itself is flawed. Secularism is not appeasement. Secularism is the freedom to practice any religion that you choose to. to believe in any god that you choose to observe religious traditions that you choose to. Secularism doesn't mean to be anti-Hindu or anti-Muslim. So, what has happened, Adit, and strangely, when I'll stop here, there are, experts like Charlotte and Abhijit. What has happened is this government, the BJP, is brilliant in administration. It is the worst in communication.
Okay.
These jokers have no idea of how to communicate. Other than Narendra Modi and Amit Shah, they have no idea. The government itself cannot communicate. I mean, it's a basket case, if you ask me.
You're basically giving the precedence of the farm laws. You're talking
If
about
they were able, if they were able to communicate all these things, it would be clear. Do you know that there have been so-called intelligent liberals, if you can ever use that phrase together, I mean, two words together, who have said, oh, NRC, CAA. So there's also confusion on the other end. And the tragedy is no one has been able to succinctly, legally, and from the spirit of the law, able to define the contours of the CAA. It is the Citizenship Amendment Act. It is not the Citizenship Act. The amendment word, to my mind, is critical.
Fair point. Thanks, Sol. I think that was quite insightful. Going to Charlotte next. Charlotte, you made a tweet, I think, about 3 days ago. And as a consequence, you mentioned that your Twitter was absolutely swamped, bombarded with all sorts of comments, all sorts of views, etc., etc. But your tweet basically alluded you to hold a certain amount of biases with regards to this particular law as well, where you mentioned that why have you not mentioned the Ahmadiyas who are persecuted in Pakistan, for example, where they're not even considered to be Muslims, where their mosques are regularly bombarded. They are persecuted at an individual level, at a societal level. And the same goes for the Shias, the atheists, the homosexuals in Pakistan and Bangladesh and Afghanistan, who are essentially stoned. But while they're not included in these 6 classifications, which have been outlined in the CAA on the basis of intelligible differentia, they are not excluded from applying for the citizenship. They are not expedited, certainly, from a CAA perspective. But there are security concerns as well, which I'll later on, I'll get Abhijit to talk about. But following your initial assessment, you put out another tweet saying that your tweet may have come in haste. So what has changed in the last couple of days? What have you read about it? The reason why I think it's important for you to highlight this is because from a Western perspective, I think a lot of them see it from a very pigeonhole kind of a very myopic kind of a vision, where you're looking at it from a very contemporary sort of things, not taking into account the legacy of the partition, of all of the ills of the partition that we've had to endure as a consequence. Charlotte.
Yeah, I think Sahel brought up a really important part of history, which I really looked into as well when thinking about what I was going to say today. But I would take his discussion a little bit further, the look at the displaced people and evacuees in 1947 and 1948. So I would see it a bit differently to Muslims wanting to go to Pakistan and finding that it didn't suit them and coming back. If you really look at the history of partition, you have Muslims fleeing violence and Hindus fleeing violence in Pakistan and vice versa. The horror and violence that both communities experienced was the same in that time, with the extent to which they were facing violence, threat of violence. And you had those on horrific train journeys all the way up north being massacred along the way. It wasn't a choice to leave for many. That was a forced exodus for many, and within a year many were wanting to return. And you had a difference in how they were classified, as Sahel said, as evacuees and displaced. But what happened for the evacuees is you then brought in the permit law, which meant that those that were trying to come back, but their houses were already being used for those of Dharmic belief that had fled Pakistan and come down, they would not be able to get permit. They could have their permit vetoed. And it was really interesting that the figures were 22,000 Muslims had returned. And because of the permit law, only 2,000 were able to get permits. So that meant 20,000 were rejected. So what concerns me about the Citizens Amendment Act, which of course it's an amendment act, it's a fast track to citizenship, but it adds an extra layer. It allows you to have that fast track with a lower bar for documentation. What you end up having is people with no documentation to very little documentation who have fled various incidences of war, whether that's partition or 1970, 1971, including, I think it should be Rohingya. I'm sure Abhijit's going to talk about that. But we're talking about a lot that have sought refuge and asylum in India, but there isn't the same refugee sort of processes as you would see in other countries. India doesn't sign up to the same refugee acts. And you have essentially a path to citizenship set out in the 1950s in the first act, now amended, that allows a fast track with lesser documentation that prioritizes a large number of groups. And interestingly enough, I think it's predicted only 2 Buddhists and 2 Parsis are even going to use this act. So I've had a lot of people say to me as I've talked about the Ahmadiyya, and I've been in contact with Ahmadiyya UK just to make sure I'm right in saying this. Yes, there are a low number of Ahmadis that have fled to India, but for sure more than 2. So if we're going to say there's no point in including these groups,
I think we're making a bit of a problem here. When we look at these numbers, the ones that the government of India has essentially put out, the 31,000 odd, those are the official numbers who've essentially come through legal means and have had themselves known to the government that we are persecuted and we are here for asylum. The numbers are going to be much more bigger than the 31,000 because there are many who are actually anonymously living here. So
Absolutely.
where I come from, West Bengal, there are the Rajbangshis, the Namshudras, that community in Rajasthan and Gujarat. There are many who've essentially not let themselves known. So it's, I think, more about them as well.
I'm sure that the numbers are going to be far greater and also impossible to determine, as is the case in India. It's very difficult without there being a registration, which will come onto the NRC. There is a lack of knowledge of who is there, and it's part of why there needs to be a sorting of identifying people and knowing who are legal and who are not legal, and I understand that. But coming back to the evacuees and permits, I think what's been missed, and Adit, we were talking about this, about the Western media approach. What's been missed here, and what I think is hypocritical of the Western approach to the issue, is that there is this negative focus on the BJP when actually Nehru, through the Permit Act, was doing very similar to what this act, I believe both are discriminatory, by the way. I'm not happy with either. But there is an overemphasis on this being something that's Hindu nationalist and nasty from the BJP. But actually, this is something that since partition, which rightly said by Suhail, created and put forward by the British. I am Scottish, but I'm sure my family weren't involved. But you can see that the situation has created a religious lens, and Nehru himself, through the permits, without being explicit, created a way in which those that were coming back from Pakistan were not able very easily to get permits, and then later.
But do you not see the problem on the basis of intelligible differentia, where there were 3 states which were created, rather two states which are Islamic states. So you have East and West Pakistan, Afghanistan, which is today, run as a Taliban regime. So why would you need to provide or rather give expedited permissions of citizenship or grant citizenship to those people who already have an Islamic state?
Okay,
that is second. That is internal issues. So the argument that I'm trying to make is, imagine in India, if you had a Hindu persecuting another Hindu, that's a second issue. It's not that of a religious persecution. You can define
I disagree.
Okay, fair enough.
These are Islamo-fascist states that have a very strict interpretation of Islam. They consider these groups to be heretics. Now, India and the UK and the West consider people to have a right to self-identify and identify as Muslim, and we allow for a greater stretch in how one interprets one's identity. Now, these Islamo-fascist states are creating persecuted Muslim groups by dictating that they are not Muslim. Now, India accepts they are Muslim. The UK accepts they're Muslim. We have a huge Ahmadiyya asylum group in the UK that are a brilliant contribution to our society. They are at the front line of counter-extremism. They don't believe in violent jihad. They are really useful in
So
tackling
then,
Islam.
do you not think the West is essentially being hypocritical because they're picking on India, but they're actually not going after Pakistan and Bangladesh for actually
Oh,
persecuting?
absolutely. Absolutely. I think the Western media has a terrible approach to Pakistan, a complete blind spot, and doesn't discuss the persecution of these groups at all. And it will lightly touch on the Ahmadiyya because the Ahmadi have a really strong lobbying of the media, and they have contacts within the media, and they're able to get their story into the media. But all the other groups are, I would say, completely ignored. And there is this over attention on India. Which makes me want to come to India's defense. But unfortunately, in my reading of the CAA and the history of the way in which Nehru approached this 1947, 1948, and where we are today, plus CAA plus NRC, I just see this as a way in which to send the Rohingya back. I mean, that's the only way I can read this.
Why is the NRC coming into contention here? Because it's not even been
Because
spelled out. There isn't even a draft version of it. Yes, there are political parties which are essentially talking about it, but that can be.
it seems
Sorry,
when
go
you
on.
read the CAA, and the CAA means that you get a fast track without the right amount of documentation according to the previous act. So a lower bar for documentation, you get a fast track to citizenship. Then when you have the NRC, which means that if you don't have the right documentation, you haven't managed to get yourself citizenship, you are an illegal, and you are then at risk of deportation. If the Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, Parsis, and Christians get this fast track without documentation, then those that have sought refuge without the right amount of documentation, because that's what happens when you flee, then that puts just the Muslims, and you could say atheists, you could say Jews, but really, when we talk about numbers, we're talking about large numbers of Muslims that have fled over from Myanmar, and you could talk about a select few that have come over from Pakistan, like the Ahmadiyya, maybe LGBT Muslims. These are put at a higher risk of deportation. That is the natural consequence of these acts read together. There's no other way of looking at it.
Okay, fair point. Fair point. I think we hear you. Abhijit, hello. How are you doing? Coming to you, I wanted to get your views on this particular issue, which Charlotte essentially makes a point about. And you essentially said that, Ahmadiyyas were at the forefront of the creation of Pakistan. So you've essentially made your bed and you must lie in it. I think that was your argument at the end of the day. We don't class Ahmadiyyas as a separate community. We class them within the gambit of Islam, within the gambit of Muslims. We see Shia, Sunnis, all the 72 firqas as the same. When Charlotte makes this point that in Pakistan and Bangladesh, they are a persecuted minority, should India be taking cognizance of that and paving a way for them? That's number one. And number two, most importantly, how would you see, would you see this law arbitrary in nature? Would you see this because there is a Hindu nationalist government in India, as per how the Western media essentially describes it, which is why they only prioritizing the Hindus. So when we look through the pages right up to the partition, we are not taking into cognizance of what is essentially happening during 1946 provincial elections, when a certain majority essentially overwhelmingly voted for the Muslim League and the Pakistan movement. So should we leave them out? Should we dehyphenate all of that history? Abhijit.
So here's the thing. First, you see, intra-Muslim quibbles aren't our problem. Okay, because today what is done to Ahmadiyyas and Shias, tomorrow the Hanafis will do to the Salafis, the Hanbali school will do to the Itna Sharia school, etc., etc. This is an endless rabbit hole to get into. And the kind of crap that Pakistan is in today, the nature of such states is to constantly find some other minority in search of this artificial purity of Islam that existed under the Rashidun Caliphate. And so if you start off accepting that Ahmadis and Shias are persecuted minorities in Pakistan today, that is a rabbit hole where the whole of Pakistan ultimately will end up shifting to India, except, say Ashraf, Hanafi elites. Number one. Number two, remember, the Ahmadiyas were not just the intellectual forefront of partition. They were also an extremely disturbed and disturbing minority in India their leadership instigated a heck of a lot of riots in India in the lead up to partition. The objectives resolution was, after all, drafted by by an Ahmadiyya. So there is also the issue then that now you've gotten tired of what you created, and you want to move back. That doesn't work. All of this basically adds up to a relitigation of a historical partition. This is like the Palestinian right to return home. I'm sorry, but there is no right to return home. All right. You made your bed, you lay in it. Political realities change, sure. When those political realities change, I'm sure the attitude towards Muslims coming in from these three countries will change. Right now, those political realities simply have not changed. Full stop. Third, there are three people who are specifically excluded: Rohingya, Sri Lankan Tamils, and Bhutanese Hindus. Remember, Bhutan, everybody wants, has this hunky dory image of Bhutan. It is one of the most genocidal, autocratic, dark states around, which has this fantastic thing of, literally filleting foreign reporters who come there and seducing them into a sense of, gross happiness index or whatever nonsense they come up with. Gross happiness index, when you go to Bhutan, is as much of a sick, disgusting term in a genocidal state as Arbeitmacht frei outside the Auschwitz entrance. So what ends up happening out here is, if you give the Bhutanese Hindus citizenship, first, it destabilizes your Gorkha land, which is that northern part of Bengal, that little Siliguri corridor in Bengal, which creates huge tension out here because these are apparently Nepalese origin Hindus. Right. This is the same reason we did not even accept any Indians back from Uganda when Idi Amin kicked out all the Indians from there. Nehru refused to take any of them back. They all went and settled in Britain. Right. Why? Because it creates it's one tribal group. It was mostly Gujaratis coming back to Gujarat, which would upset the apple cart. Third, remember, we have 700. Forget the Rohingyas. The Rohingyas are irrelevant in number. You look at the Sri Lankan Tamils. There are 700,000 Sri Lankan Tamil Hindus and Christians, overwhelmingly Hindu, who have not been granted citizenship. Why? Because if we grant them citizenship, as per the treaty, it weakens their cause in Sri Lanka, because Sri Lanka has also promised to give citizenship to all so-called Tamils of Indian origin who were there after 1964 or 67, I forget. So there are treaty obligations out there. Rohingyas, I think we need to go back to why the refugee problem started. Remember, if you follow all these Rohingya handles on Twitter, you will see during the period that started off, it was a very deliberate attempt to ignite a conflagration and invite third-party intervention, namely regime change intervention in there. You look at the words that were used: disproportionate, right to protect, right while protecting. They've already decided, the British and French are going to invade, and right to protect applies and things like that. We can't go around rewarding a deliberate escalation in order to bring about regime change. Remember, even when 10 million refugees came into India in 1971, we did not declare war. We allowed Pakistan to attack us on the Western Front first, and then we declared war. When on 9th December, the Pakistan Air Force came and bombed Indian airfields. Right? So there are all kinds of interlinked issues out here. The Rohingyas are a very problematic minority. The Ahmadiyas will most probably be an extremely problematic minority. Different people act differently based on the surrounding situations and circumstances. This is number one. Number two, there is nothing discriminatory when you are very pointedly picking out countries. Selectivity, incidentally, is part of the law. Tomorrow, if Suhail goes and spits pan outside his house, and I go and spit pan outside the house. The police catches me but not Suhail. My defense in court cannot be that, well, you didn't catch Suhail when he spat pan outside his house, but you're catching me when I spit pan outside the house. That's not the way the law works. Selectivity is built into the law. It is an accepted part of the law, not just in India, across the world. So selectivity of criteria is very important. Next, you brought about Article 14 and Article 15. Well, you brought up Article 14. I'm going to bring up Article 15 because that is the more relevant one. See, Article 14 is very clear in its language of the Constitution. The state shall not deny to any person equality before the law or equal protection of the laws within the territory of India. Now, you have to read it in conjunction with Article 15. The state shall not discriminate against any citizen, word use, citizen, on the grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, place, or birth.
So you're saying that everybody who's harping about Article 14 is just looking at it from a Article 14 perspective, but you actually have to take both into
Article
account.
14 with Article 15. All right. Next, remember, there is the Lautenberg Amendment in the US, which was very specifically targeted Jews immigrating out. They have had several such exceptions. In fact, America accepted 80,000 Bhutanese Hindus, lowering the threshold for them. You know, those Bhutanese Hindus who got kicked out, they were not allowed to live in India. They all immigrated to America because special provisions were made for them, lowering the threshold of immigration and things like that to go to America. So selectivity based on very specific persecution has been built in. See, nothing is single point. You have to look at it as a basket of things. Interconnected treaties, the legacy of partition, a relitigation of partition, and how each individual community affects or disaffects India if they come in, and the history of that particular persecution.
Fair point. So, because Abhijit went on to discussing about United States, United States has previously given citizenship to Russian Jews between the period of 1970 and 1972. They didn't provide the same access of citizenship to Russian Soviet Muslims or Chechen Muslims, for example. So there was that selectiveness. Now, today you have America or United States of America essentially saying we will closely monitor the implementation of CAA. You also have countries like France, you have countries like Russia who are saying CAA is completely an internal matter of India, and we have absolutely no jurisdiction. So, how do you see this? The Five Eye countries who are coming in and sort of preaching India and saying things like we are watching you very closely, etc.
When a caravan is moving on the street, there are stray dogs who, by the way, I love dogs. There are stray dogs that will bark, but the caravan doesn't stop. Every time there's a dog barking, caravan moves on. You think we really care about what America feels? America's a synonym for hypocrisy, much like Great Britain is, other than Scotland. You see, America and Americans have been rascals for the longest time possible. They have no religion except the Benjamin. And I hope you understand when I say Benjamin what I mean. They're only interested in the money. You show them the money, they'll sell their flag if they already haven't sold. So I'm not bothered about America. Number two, who is America to tell us today about how to handle migration or reverse migration or whatever? That whole goddamn country was built on migration. There are only two countries which were built on migration: America and Australia. Australia got the criminals, those guys got the confused guys. I mean, can you imagine Christopher Columbus set out to come to us and he found those jokers? So I don't care about what America feels. I will tell you something today which is very important for me to share. I do one trip to New York every month. Abhijit knows, and I meet the so-called top guys, in intellectual terms, the corporate world. America is actually a dumb country. People there, by and large, are dumb. Other than the Palo Alto area, by and large, Americans are duffers.
This is going viral, by the way.
I don't care. Do you think I care? Do I look like the kind of guy who's really scared of America? Oh my God, FBI, CIA will come and bomb me. No, they're essentially dumb. Why are they dumb? Because they've been dumbed down. You heard the joke that half these Johnnies, if you ask them to point out Texas on a map, and if they live in New York, they won't be able to point it. So don't go by what America says. Look at the choices that America has made. You've got one guy who can't climb a flight of steps without falling thrice. You've got another guy who's been falling all over himself, making gaffes one after the other. One guy is 81, the other guy is 76, and America has to choose between these two jokers. Now, a country which has a president who looks, behaves, and talks like Joe Biden can hardly preach to the world. Then a country who has Donald Trump. And yesterday there was a very interesting, I was reading it in the Atlantic or watching it on television. Everything that Donald Trump does is first to satisfy his own business interests. Then comes America. So don't go by what America says. Don't go by what any country says. It is our matter. Once these people become citizens of India, we are responsible. We means the government is responsible. Abhijit and I are certainly not responsible. Number two, these people, which means our government, to my mind, knows exactly what they're doing. They're not stupid. They haven't won elections out of stupidity. So, cut them the slack. And look, what is the BJP saying that is harmful to India? Nothing. Would you like a situation? Both of us have been, I don't know if you're still in Calcutta. I was born and raised in Calcutta. We saw the infiltration through Bangladesh. We saw the infiltration from Bangladesh into the Northeast. We saw the infiltration of Bangladesh into West Bengal. We've seen the cattle smuggling trade. We've seen everything. Those guys are unidentified, undocumented. It's mayhem. I have a lot of time for Mamta. I've known Mamta Banerjee for ages, but Mamta has done the kind of heinous appeasement that would put anyone to shame. So what are we talking about? At least these guys have the guts to say, we will give you citizenship, you will be documented. We can track you. Rather than come in undocumented, do whatever the hell you want and then get away.
Just on that note, the Home Minister in Calcutta made a very passionate speech. He said, we promised to provide citizenship to the religious persecuted minority. And that had been endorsed by the likes of Manmohan Singh in 2003. This is what the Home Minister essentially said. But there have been political parties like Rajiv Gandhi, CPIM, including Mamta Banerjee, who has herself said that, this is quintessential. We go back as far as to Nehru, Patel, Dr. Prasad, Acharya Kriplani, Maulana Azad. All of them have essentially said this. So is it historical amnesia that is set in within that section, which is essentially objecting to this law, or is it simple politics of dishonesty?
It's convenience. Remember, in India, by and large, people don't win an election. Political parties lose an election. If anyone says, oh, BJP is winning, no, it's the jokers in the Congress that have willingly lost. So take that number one. Number two, they are all rascals of the highest order. All. So don't think that ek koi doodh ka dhula hua hai, which basically means Charlotte bathed in milk, darling. No one in India is bathed in milk. And India is like this large Turkish bath. It's like a hammam. Everyone is naked. So no one can say, oh, but I'm holier than thou. Everyone is practicing the policies of appeasement. The difference between Narendra Modi and the previous dispensation is he says it as it is and he delivers on what he says. There is no hypocrisy. Go back into time. Let's start with 1948. Who was the most disillusioned with the Constitution of India? Its maker, B.R. Ambedkar, who in Parliament said that he was the most disillusioned. So much so, he was disillusioned with the Constitution, he was disillusioned with the political classes, he was disillusioned with what was happening to Hinduism. All thanks to Mahatma Gandhi. He actually converted to Buddhism.
And he also advocated.
Then you had Indira Gandhi, who destroyed every institution of India. Nationalized the banks, nationalized insurance companies, Aya Ram, Gaya Ram, which means the politics of appeasement, the politics of, switching sides, corporate loot, capital cronyism, all from her. So what are these people preaching? They have muddied the waters. You tell me, who is it Narendra Modi's job every morning to get up with a shopping bag and to go to Khan Market looking for an opposition? No, it's the goddamn opposition's job. Is it the opposition's job to keep criticizing Modi without even reading papers? That's what they're doing. That's why they get mud on the face. Now you tell me, and I want Charlotte to answer this because she's overseas. She knows. I'm in and out of this country twice, thrice a month. I'm seeing how India and Indians are being treated now compared to what they were being treated 10 years ago. 10 years ago, everyone was talking about corruption. Now these jokers have started about electoral bonds. This also won't last. Now, my point is that in this atmosphere, it is important to trust your government, but it is equally important for the government to be clear in its communication. The lacuna or the flaw is there is zero clarity in communicating what benefits the government is providing to people. And that, to my mind, is the biggest thing. It's not about CAA. It's the communication gap more than the citizenship amendment that these people need to act upon. No pun intended.
Right, let's go back to Charlotte on that one. So, Charlotte, there's a number of questions actually flowing in for you. So, one of them is about, it's your day job to essentially dismantle false narratives like you did when you were part of Henry Jackson's Society during the Leicester riots. So when a Washington Post or a BBC write an article and they say that India's new citizenship law excludes the Muslims, what is the kind of messaging do you think they're trying to send out to its readers? There are a few, by the way. And the BBC also apparently fact-checked some of the statements made by the Home Minister with relation to the statistics, which claim the population of Hindus to be, etc., in Pakistan in 1951. And, it hasn't changed much, which was their argument. But what they essentially failed to take cognizance of is that the population of Hindus did not grow, but they were essentially persecuted from a constitutional perspective. So, for example, a Muslim in India can actually become a prime minister if he wishes to stand for elections, but a non-Muslim in Pakistan cannot actually stand for elections and become the prime minister of India.
I'd say that the Western press has done two things. One, there's been a pattern of misunderstanding the CAA as something that is currently going to give refuge to people fleeing over the border. So this is a pre-2014 fast track for citizenship, not a present day, whoever is being persecuted, it gives fast tracks to. And I think Abhijit was sort of talking about, we don't have to take everyone, and if we took everyone, we would be starting to take different sects that are being persecuted, and that could change and could go on and on and on as there's more and more infighting. But that also misreads the fact that this is a pre-2014 act. Then the other thing that I think the Western media is incredibly guilty of is favouring Pakistan. So when I read that BBC article that you're talking about, you sent it to me earlier today, I thought it was incredibly insulting in the way it downplayed the persecution of minorities in Pakistan. And that included Hindus and Ahmadis. Like it talked about it as if it's a little bit of discrimination here, not much of a problem, not borderline genocide, what many refer to as an ethnic cleansing when it comes to the Hindus. And the Ahmadis continue to be killed for their beliefs, not allowed to declare themselves Muslim. They're not allowed passports, not allowed to go to mosque, say salam alaikum. They've faced blasphemy charges or on death row for the horrendous blasphemy laws that they have in Pakistan. And the West seems to, because of its history of a allyship with Pakistan, and because of India's history, therefore, of closeness to Russia that has come out of our closeness to Pakistan, has created a trench and a divide that seeps into the way Pakistan is spoken to and the way India is spoken about. And there's definitely a bias against India and a want to see India in a negative lens. And I think that really speaks to what Suhail was saying about the BJP needs to do better at communicating. So whilst I do disagree with the CAA, I disagree with the way the UK is treating boats and flying people off to Rwanda, or at least trying to. I disagree with the way Trump talks about Mexicans. I disagree wholeheartedly with the way the world is turning towards migration and immigration. This is not just an India problem for me, but India has tread on something that I find horrific across the globe right now, a trend. But what the Western media will do is focus purely on India, what India is doing, whilst we are drowning people off the coast and the channel.
Okay. So Abhijit, coming back to you, Charlotte made a point where she disagrees with the CAA primarily because it is sort of still exclusionary. It is still not taking into account all of the persecuted. So there is this argument that, how far do we go? Because ultimately we only have limited number of resources, a limited land scope, and thereby we cannot provide for everybody. So we are essentially prioritizing. So that is the argument that has been put forth. But in 1948, Liaquat Ali Khan, he made a very disgusting statement at the time, and he said, "Who will clean our toilets if essentially the marginalized Hindus or the backward class were to leave Pakistan?" Most opposition parties in India also endorse the Jai Bhim, Jai Meme slogan, but are vociferously objecting to this law, which is essentially bringing back those marginalized who are from absolutely the lower strata of society. With great difficulties, they've been able to come across, at the cost of their lives, monies, properties, etc., for a better hope of life, freedom, and liberty. The fact that nobody talks about them is an issue for me. We could talk about Ahmadiyas, the LGBTs, the Jews, but there has been absolutely no conversation on social media, on media, or even in visual media about the marginalized here. Abhijit, what's your take on this one?
So, it's very well known that they're Dalits, and I don't know why that isn't being highlighted, right? Most of the people who stayed back in Pakistan only stayed back because they didn't have the means to move. They were dirt poor, etc., etc., etc. But see, there are 2 points that Charlotte raised. One is that it applies pre-2014. See, every act is a precedent for the next act, right? If you don't set the precedent now, you can't do the same thing again, or it gets challenged. So you have to build up, it's called building up jurisprudence, where there is a certain consistency in acts over and over again, which helps you then put out another sort of Citizenship Amendment Act Part 2 on the basis of the same thing, with just the date moved up to, say, 2021 or something ongoing. So it's laying the legal ground, the foundational work for it, laying the jurisprudence for it. Number one. Number two is, why not Muslims from Pakistan? In many ways, Charlotte answers it herself. The BBC is swamped by Muslims from Pakistan who are essentially economic refugees, and look what they're doing in Britain. Hindus and Sikhs from India in Britain are very high income and are model citizens. I think it's a Henry Jackson Society report, which shows you that the highest incarceration rates in Britain are in fact Bangladeshi and Pakistani Muslims. It's the same story across the board in America, Australia, and everywhere where you have high Indian, Bangladeshi, and Pakistani citizenry. And that also acts as a sort of filter for who you want to allow in and don't want to allow in. See, so it's very clear. Why would you have so many people just moving to Europe? A lot of the migrations that happened, when the borders were opened up for Syria, when so many European countries opened up and said, well, just come on in, they're Pakistanis and Afghans. And you're sitting there saying, well, what exact persecution is happening out here? What war is happening in Pakistan for you to go out there? See, we're not here to fix Pakistan's problems. Okay, we're not here to fix Bangladesh's problems. And like I said, selectivity is entirely part of the law. There's nothing discriminatory about selectivity. See, Charlotte might look great and I might want her to come over for dinner or take her out for dinner, as I have on several occasions. I might not want to do that with you. Have I taken you out for dinner yet?
Not yet.
No, there you go. Am I being discriminating? You can't even accuse me of being discriminatory because I'm gay. Technically, I shouldn't have taken Charlotte out for dinner. I should have taken you out for dinner. Does that make me a bigot? No. So see, there are lots of issues that go into decision making. Almost every time. Is it nice? No. Is it ideal? No. So for example, me being brown, I will always get taken in for secondary questioning at Ben Gurion or JFK or Houston because I have Afghan, Iranian, Turkmen, Syrian stamps on my passport. Charlotte will too because she's got some of those stamps, right? At least in Ben Gurion, she will. On the other hand, a white guy, blonde hair, none of those stamps. Why? You tell me under what logic should he be taken in for questioning when he does not tick any criteria? See, this is, again, like I said, there are so many factors that go into it. He can't be taken out for questioning just to make an affirmative action statement that we're also taking blonde white people who do not have Syrian stamps also for questioning to show that we are secular or whatever. Right? It's really that simple. There's really nothing more to it.
I mean, I see what Abhijit is saying there with how we deal with security at airports, and that there are times in which discrimination, in a sense, is necessary for security reasons. But we're talking about interviewing someone or putting someone aside and taking more of their time, which you might say is justifiable disruption to your day for the sake of greater safety. But when we're talking about, and it's not positive selectivity of like the Jews in America or us going for dinner on multiple occasions. Like this is about everyone can come. Everyone can come, pretty much. I mean, you could talk about atheists.
One second. We haven't. It's exactly what you said. It's just taking some more time. It's literally.
It's not because
no. Pakistanis can absolutely apply for citizenship.
They're also illegals. They're illegals.
No. Pakistanis can apply for citizenship. This is a fast track.
But what if they don't have the right documentation?
Well, that's their problem. You are not.
But what about the Hindus that don't have the right documentation?
Have the Hindus exploded devices in India?
That's not fair.
That is fair. I'm sorry, but that is absolutely fair. It is absolutely fair to take. This is exactly how you mask. This is the wolf in sheep's clothing thing. You can just start pushing people across the border. You cannot lower the verification criteria for a security threat.
So basically what you're saying is...
all Muslims are a security threat. And
I agree.
Sorry, Charlotte.
I completely agree. Not all Muslims are a security threat. But you do have the right to determine what a security threat is and hold them to a higher threshold or take a longer time.
Right, sorry. I just wanted to break this up so I can sum it up for the audience as well. So I think what Abhijit is trying to say is that the CAA is non-exclusionary, non-discriminatory. It's just a fast-track process. So how, like you would have a visa application, you would have a separate queue to essentially expedite your visa application. The CAA essentially expedites it from that perspective.
Yeah.
The Pakistanis, the Pakistanis or Pakistani Muslims or Ahmadiyas or the atheists coming in from Pakistan are still allowed to come into India, seek refuge, carry on living here for 11 years, get entitled from that perspective, and then apply for the citizenship. That's number one.
They have their documents. If they have their documents.
Number two, most importantly, sorry, I forgot there.
But I think
no, that's okay. But most importantly, I think what Abhijit is trying to say is A, it's a fast track process, and B, why there is a certain distinction or why there is a certain time provided here is because of the security threat. So, can we back it up with statistics to say that, Muslims coming in from Pakistan are going to prove a much more risk to the Indian state. The hard date of the 31st December 2014 is probably put in place to ensure there is no one coming in the garb of essentially being a Hindu or being a Buddhist, etc. So they're not essentially, like Abhijit mentioned, sheep in a wolf's cloth coming in. So that's why the hard date of the 31st December 2014. So Abhijit, do you want to carry on from there and just build on that particular aspect?
Which particular aspect? Yeah.
About the security issue.
Well, look, you make a security consideration. Before, America used to make either security considerations or humanitarian considerations, right? So, for example, Sweden, you remember, said anybody coming from Syria is welcome. They shut down that policy, but they said it's welcome. If you can have geographic discrimination, you can also be selective in who comes from there. So, say tomorrow, Assad's family rocked up in Sweden. Technically, as per Swedish law, what was Swedish law at that time, Assad's family would also have to be given asylum. Correct? Did you want Assad's family landing up in Stockholm?
Probably not.
No, because he's the guy who's doing all the bombing and shit in Syria, right? He's pretty much won the civil war for all effects and purposes. It's really that simple. Every country has the right to exclude. They are treated as illegal migrants, but they are not thrown in jail, number one. As the case of that illegal Pakistani woman who came here and married last year. Do you remember? It was in the news for...
Seema Bhabi.
Yeah, and she got put in jail for like 2-3 weeks, and then she was released. She doesn't have her documents, but she's got naturalized. She'll have to be given naturalization now because she's married to an Indian and things like that, right? The issue was she came in illegally, right? Completely illegally, not using some very, very suspicious methods to get in, because you can't technically cross the border just like that. You have to go to Nepal and then come in from Nepal, so on and so forth. Which then again begs the question, why not settle down in Nepal? Why do you feel the need to come to India? It's again the first port of call issue, right? That the EU faces with Turkey, etc., etc. So again, every country has a right to its security scanning. It doesn't have to give a reason for that security scanning. It's really that simple.
Okay, fair enough. I think Sohail is going to be leaving very soon. So, I just wanted to take one last question to Sohail about this particular issue on Article 14. So, Sohail, you said, and Abhijit also made it clear that, this is all about classification. And on the basis of Article 14, if that was the case, then we wouldn't have, reservations in India, for example. There was a journalist who essentially tweeted out Article 14, and she was essentially bombarded by arguments as to, if Article 14 does not actually exclude between citizenship, it is supposed to be equal for everybody, then why do we have reservations? So when there are governments like the Mamata Banerjees of the world and the DMK in the south, etc., saying that we will not essentially allow CAA to be enacted in India, in our states, are they going against the basic federal structure of the country?
Yeah, but they don't care. You will have to find a determinant in the sense either the Supreme Court or an act of Parliament, which, by the way, this already is, which then forces their hand. Look, everything after 1950 has been used and abused qua the political convenience of various political parties. You think these guys really respect the Constitution? No, they treat the Constitution as a lamppost, at times for support and at times to pee on. That's the reality, whether we like it or not. The various amendments that have happened to the Constitution is not reflective only of an evolving nation. It's also reflective of a nation that has over time sought convenient politics and political advantages from these kind of petty, tweaking of the Constitution. Eventually, this is about only one thing. And this is what I feel. It is about humanity. Today, the issue is that the Hindus in Pakistan are being persecuted like you and I can't imagine. The Hindus in Bangladesh are being treated like animals and treated terribly like you and I can't imagine. If India does not give them refuge, where will they go? Those wokes and liberals are happy for them to be killed or persecuted even more. They are not. Where will they go? You tell me. A, B, it's also convenient for Narendra Modi to say that, look, the BJP is actually following through on what was envisaged by people way before, just after the freedom, just after we gained freedom. Now, everyone is doing it for politics, essentially. But here, there's a layering, to my mind, of humanity as well. Is that humanity skewed to a religion? Of course it is. What is the big debate between Palestine, between Gaza and Israel? It's the humanity debate. There are some people on one side of the aisle who are criticizing Rishi Sunak for his silence, and there are other people who are saying that, look, Netanyahu should be tried for crimes of war. Now, it depends on where you are, and it depends on where your political leanings are. And Netanyahu is perfectly justified in saying that, look, I'm not going to negotiate until all the hostages are freed. The people in Gaza can turn around and say that, look, Hamas is a terrorist outfit. Why should all of the Gazians be subjected to this kind of relentless attack? Because they're a terrorist organization. Arguments of this nature are not won only politically. They have to have a humane angle to it. That is the angle that is, again, not being communicated by the BJP.
Okay.
The BJP willy-nilly is converting this into a Hindu versus the rest debate. It is Hindus who will get primary position because they are in states that have been designated by religion, not designated by form of government. We are the Republic of India. They are the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, Islamic whatever of Bangladesh. So those things are already there. Now, if you don't make amends there, and if you don't intervene, and if you don't offer solace, then what the hell are you doing?
Okay.
So,
sorry,
Modi, it makes sense both politically as well as tom-tomming the humanity angle to give them refuge and citizenship in that order.
All right, thanks. Just taking that humanity debate to Charlotte. Charlotte, you made some strong points about the persecution of Ahmadiyas again and again in Pakistan. But again, we're missing out the bigger picture. The kind of persecution that Hindus have to go through. If you look at Sindh, for example, where there are creatures like Mia Mittu who are essentially abducting young girls as young as 13, 14-year-olds, getting them converted, married off to older men, and then you have courts in Pakistan which are essentially forcing them to go with the abductors instead of being given them back to the parents. Why is this argument not the premise of our debate?
I mean, it absolutely should be. The persecution of these people in Pakistan should be the forefront of the discussion, and that should include all persecuted groups. But I think we've strayed from the fact again that this isn't going to save people now. It's pre-2014. This is not a way for the Hindus of Pakistan to be able to have this fast-track citizenship right now. It's not a way for people that are in Pakistan to be able to now fill out a form and come with their suitcases to India and have that fast-track citizenship. And so when it comes to humanity of the current situations in these countries, it doesn't speak to that. Now, Abhijit just talked about how this could be a development of law for future laws in which these people are protected. But from what I understand, the discussions I've seen, this is about correcting the ills of partition and the 1970s war, and it's about mopping up a great deal of distress and discrimination and borderline ethnic cleansing, some arguing genocide. That it's about that period doesn't read to me in the discussions and everything that I've read in the last 24 hours, given to try and get up to speed. It doesn't suggest this is about future law. This is about correcting ills of the past. It's something that the British were pivotal in creating. So when it comes to humanity, though, when it comes to the manifestos, now let me see if I can get this correct. Commitment of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas, with all, development for all, and trust of all. Is this instilling trust in those that within years of partition fled back? Those like the Ahmadiyya, who I argue are a religious minority that are persecuted, that I don't think, as Abhijit says, and I know Abhijit doesn't think this either, that the Ahmadis are going to be a particular problematic group. He's an expert in extremism and ideological positions and ideologies. He knows as well as I do that the Ahmadis are anti-violent jihad, that they have a different way of thinking, and that it's actually quite easy to pick out within the Muslim communities which groups are going to be more vulnerable to radicalization and which ones absolutely are resilient to radicalization and actually useful to tackle radicalization. The Ahmadis being a group like that. I just feel like India missed an opportunity here to say, look, we are the big developing democracy. We are doing really well economically. We're on the way up, and we're here for humanity to take persecuted minority groups that are persecuted by the Islamo-fascist state that is Pakistan. We're the bigger person, the bigger country. There are not many Ahmadis. It's not like you have a massive number, but you'd have been able to say, look, we gave home to the Ahmadis.
But then
No. She died in 1997. She died on September the 5th, 1997. Just like Queen Elizabeth died on 5th of September, year before last. Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa. We're not Mother Teresa. Okay? We're not a country where we'll say, chalo bhai, everyone come, we are this great land of promise and plenty. No. We don't have.
Do you want to be Germany?
Our people are dying, yeah?
Exactly. So see, this is the point.
No, we are not the bloody United Nations refugee organization.
Exactly. So I think, the issue here is, even as a PR exercise, it would have gotten us 0 brownie points.
Correct.
The people who want to criticize us will anyway criticize us. So there is no this thing. Second, Charlotte makes an important point. It has to be done because there is a deterrent value. You're essentially telling Ahmadis and Shias not to come, or saying, well, there is no guarantee, go somewhere else, essentially. And telling them that, you better make your adjustments with the state of Pakistan. We are not a backup option for you, which is again a valid point. Third, different societies behave differently under different stimuli. We saw how the Ahmadis were at the forefront of partition, despite being an extremely well-to-do, rich society. Even at that point of time, they were actually from Qadian. They're called the Qadianis, which is not too far from Delhi. It's one of those villages very close to Delhi, which is a hotbed of radicalization even today. Surprise, surprise. A lot of those riots that happened last year, if you remember, that Monu Manesar chap, were around the Qadian region, which extended down to Gurgaon and things like that. Gurgaon also went up in flames. So they will behave very differently somewhere else. We don't know if that exact stimulus and that exact environment exists in India. Why take the risk? You've seen how this community behaved in 1947. Do you really want to try it again? Sure, history moves on. The Ahmadiyya, the 2024 Ahmadiyya is not the 1947 Ahmadiyya. The question is, do you actually want to take that risk? Third, Charlotte is right. This doesn't come in the public statements on the creation of jurisprudence on this particular thing. But remember, nobody talked about the SC/ST Act being applied to Kashmir as being the precursor to Article 370 being abrogated ultimately. But that is exactly why it was done. It was done on the basis of reservation to scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in Kashmir, that you tested the notion that the governor of Kashmir replaces the Assembly of Kashmir in granting the legal validation required for changes to Kashmir's constitution or penal code or whatever. But that was actually the Trojan horse with which Article 370 was finally abrogated. Nobody spoke about it, but that's how it was used. Again, this doesn't have to be spoken about, but it does create the jurisprudence. So I'm not talking about the public debate. I'm actually talking about the creation of that jurisprudence.
I do think, Abhijit, forecasting is really interesting to look at, and I think there's a lot of merit in it. But I think when I do the forecasting on this, it's not going to be about humanity. It's not going to be about safeguarding people. It's not going to be about saving these groups. For me, when you look at the Citizens Amendment Act and the NRC, it's more about carving out a distinct group that will be illegal, whilst others won't be caught up when the deportation. For me, if you want to forecast, if there's a deportation to take place, the Hindus, the Sikhs, the Parsis, the Jains, the Christians will be safeguarded from being chucked out, should you want to predict that there's going to be a chuck out. When you look at my Twitter, let's take my Twitter as an example, the amount of extreme anti-Muslim bigotry on the back of my tweet. And even when I did stuff for in support of the Ram Temple, I even had people sending tweets of cows smashing through mosques and being like, well done, Charlotte, for standing up for us. Now we're going to go and get all the other mosques. You know, that there is a real fear that the trajectory and the direction is going to be one of deportation of illegals, not one of this is great, kumbaya, let's bring everyone in.
Historically, when has India ever deported illegal immigrants? I can tell you about 3-4 white people who've been deported, but we have never deported, even after Rajiv Gandhi was suicide bombed in Tamil Nadu. We did not send back any Sri Lankan Tamils back to Sri Lanka. We have never forcibly deported people.
We've never had a religious Citizenship Act either. You've never had citizenship based on religious identity before.
But it's can you argue that it's based on?
But that's different from deportation. Because nobody is deporting. There is no talk of deporting any of these people. And Amit Shah has actually come on the record. Now, suppose that's because we're not clubbing this with NRC. Let's assume you club it with NRC. Amit Shah was asked at the India Today conference, what happens to people, say, from Bangladesh who are not given citizenship? And his reply was, look, if Bangladesh refuses to accept them, we can't keep them in a camp. You know, they have to be given the right to work and things like that. They're not going to be given citizenship, but they'll be given the right to work, etc., 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 till such time as we make provisions for them to go back. There is no forcible deportation happening out here. There is no concentration camps opening out here. And might I remind everyone, the concentration camps happened because a certain Chief Justice Gogoi from Assam, who is an Assamese ultra-nationalist, wanted something happening with his own state, which is actually a call for judicial reforms out here and the absolute capriciousness and tyranny of the judiciary of India, and nothing to do with the law per se.
I didn't even know there were concentration camps.
Well, that's what Gogoi wanted created. That's what the Chief Justice of India wanted created. And for a while they did operate, and but India has a history of concentration camps. You know, during the war with China, we took Indian citizens of Chinese origin and put them in concentration camps in the middle of the Rajasthan desert. And they had horrific attrition rates because of dehydration, disease, exposure, and things like that. All of this happened under Nehru, by the way.
Right. Let's not open up that Pandora's box. Otherwise, we'll be chasing a different.
Okay, I'll take your leave, Charlotte. Right. Lovely to meet you. Bye, Abhijit. And the unknown and all the unknown men who are muted visually.
Thanks so much, Sohail. Thanks so much for.
Lovely to meet you over the screen.
Charlotte, where are you based in London?
I'm between London and Devon. Because I'm in Devon right now, in the south.
The next time she comes down, Sohail, I'll bring her down for one of your fabulous dinners.
Oh, yes.
Oh, that'll be good. You can invite me also, by the way.
Bye.
Thank you.
But Adit, we're not inviting you, Adit.
Yeah,
otherwise, me taking you out, asking you out dinner constitutes sexual harassment.
Okay, fair point. Thanks, sir. So, Abhijit, I think one very important aspect that we missed out is we primarily focus on the western border. Our focus has always been on the western part of India, Pakistan side. The Bangladesh side, we've never had that kind of an open discussion. Even today, Dr. Abdul Barkat's study, which is I think done in 2016 and 17, where he actually says that 632 Hindus from Bangladesh leave Bangladesh every day to essentially seek refuge in other countries. So by that trajectory, by 2050, there will not be any Hindus left in Bangladesh. So that was one of the studies that he published as part of his, as part of the Dhaka University.
The Nehru protected East Pakistan from the Permit Act, so that those that were coming from East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, were able to more easily able to get their legal right to remain in India than those coming from West. And that was specifically, again, Nehru being quite clever in avoiding being explicit about the religions that he wanted to cater for, but allowing to ensure that Hindus had that safe passage, whilst ensuring those that are coming from West, which was a lot of returnees, were blocked. So I think the hypocrisy from the Western media is that they're not accepting the fact that this is something that has been done and enacted, throughout different governments.
No, but why do you actually have to see this as a problem? See, primarily, so let me draw this up for you. So 1947, the partition happens on the basis of religious lines, right? 18 July 1947, you've got the British parliamentary debates there, which is saying that Pakistan is essentially the expression of the Indian Muslims. You've made your choice. You've even voted for the Pakistan movement and the Muslim League in the 1946 provincial elections. Now you have gone there. You don't like it. It's unfortunate.
But that is not a fair assessment. Many were forced up there. And the ones that were returning in the first year may well have been those that were fleeing from being massacred to then come back and try to get their homes back, but their homes were already being taken for relocating others that were coming down. So it's not fair to say that they went up there and it happened to not be what they wanted. Just imagine people picking up their entire livelihoods and abandoning their homes to go up to the north. They're not doing that because they think.
No, but Charlotte, it was all religiously motivated, right? So you're essentially you are essentially envisioning a theocratic state. You want to live in.
So we shouldn't add more religion to the mix. It's no two wrongs don't make a right. But adding more religion into it.
But here the question is about the persecuted minorities who are living in a theocratic state, which is essentially constitutionally belittling them.
Make sure that they the great thing about the CAA is that it is actually going to help people. We shouldn't forget the fact that there is great merit in the fact that now people are going to be helped. But you cannot come away from looking at the CAA, especially read alongside the NRC, and say that it is not discriminatory, because you could argue that it's okay. You could argue it's okay that it's discriminatory. You could argue that it's necessary that it's discriminatory. You could argue that because Pakistan and Afghanistan and Bangladesh are being discriminatory, it's okay that this is discriminatory. But you cannot say that it's not discriminatory. And you have to accept the fact that there are persecuted religious minorities that are Muslim as well, that this does not help. There are victims who experience they're victims the same, they're experiencing the same kind of pain, yet because they fall under the Muslim umbrella, they're not helped. You could say, oh well, we're not Mother Teresa, we've heard that, we're not here to help everyone. Right, okay, you can make that argument, but for me, the standard that I want to apply to the UK as well, I think it's abhorrent that we're sending asylum seekers to Rwanda. I think we grossly manipulate the news around what is illegal and who's asylum and who's seeking refuge, and there's a horrible political play, again ramping up just before our elections. And I will hold the UK to account in the same way that India, and I happen to be speaking on India because I've done field research in India and I've spent time looking around India. I don't mean to intrude as a white person in the Indian space, just so happens to be in my area of field work.
Okay, so we go back to Abhijit on that particular question. Is it discriminatory? Because we keep coming back to that Ahmadiyya part where Charlotte's essentially seeing them as a persecuted minority. We as Indians see Ahmadiyya as part of the Islamic world. Therefore, it's a sectarian issue. There can be an argument made from an Indian perspective that if there are issues between a Hindu and another Hindu, one being a Shaivite and the other being a Vaishnavite, could that be seen as a religious issue? Given the fact that they both come from different schools of thoughts within the gambit of Hinduism. So can that be made into an argument? So how far are you willing to push to ensure that you can actually include everybody?
I'm not willing to push at all. My people, the atheists, have also been excluded from the act. I'm not willing to push because in India, I'm considered a Hindu. Atheism is one of the 12 schools of Hinduism. So if you're an atheist in Pakistan, just claim you're a Hindu and come.
I am
What's
Jain, by the way.
huh?
I am Jain, by the way.
You're Jain, yeah. So what prevents you from coming? So my people, my people have two options, which is to either claim they're Charvaka Hindus, and if they don't claim they're Charvaka Hindus, then you're not coming in, right? Jews, again, I'm not going to push for Jews to come here. I don't think there are any Pakistani Jews left. Maybe 10, 15. If they come here, they'll probably be welcome, and the Israeli embassy will only be very happy to process their visas very quickly. If they want to stay here, nobody's deporting them at any rate. Nobody's going to throw them into concentration camps at any rate. Citizenship, question mark. If they have the documentation, they'll get it. We need to differentiate between selectivity and discrimination. Okay, discrimination is essentially based in bigotry. Selectivity is based on logic. Okay, here the requirements on the Indian state to essentially give the benefit of doubt to what could be a security related infiltration is too great. So I'm not willing. I'm fairly. There is no such thing as a perfect law. There is no law that does not hurt some people, affect some people negatively. Say 90% will be happy with it, 10% will be. For example, nationalization. I'm sure all the 90% of poor people in India will be super thrilled with if we nationalize Mukesh Ambani's properties. I don't think Mukesh Ambani and the Ambani family will be terribly happy with it, or Reliance would be terribly happy with it. So, this is the way laws work. You accept selectivity in law. I would just argue this is a selective law. It's not a discriminatory law.
Okay, fair point. Charlotte, are we coming to some sort of an agreement on that particular part where it's a selective law but not a discriminatory law? Or are you still of the opinion?
No, I think Abhijit and I disagree on this one. I think, if you're going to select pretty much everyone bar one group, it becomes discriminatory. Selective if maybe you said we're going to help one group. Yes.
But atheists aren't included. Rastafarians aren't included. Jews
But
aren't.
you just said that atheists could claim they're Hindu and come in
If they
because
want,
they're
if they want, because if they claim they're Hindu, they are definitely going to be killed in Pakistan. I can tell you that.
So there we go. So it includes an awful lot and excludes a very narrow amount of people. I mean, don't know how else you want to define discrimination, to be honest.
Well,
Right.
look, it's again, it's discrimination is an illogical matrix of decision making.
You can argue that it's valid. You could argue it's valid discrimination. I'm just making the point that it is
But if
discrimination.
it's valid, it's not discrimination. If it's valid, it's selectivity. That's my argument.
I think we're getting stuck in the semantics of it now. So I think let's move to closing this particular chapter, because I think
we've ran over by half an hour.
we have.
How many people joined us, Adit? Can you see?
I think about 250 when we were essentially set out 300 approximately is what I've been told. So it's good. At least we are having conversations. We are bringing in historicity. We're bringing in the legal aspect and also the societal aspect, and ultimately we're trying to dismantle the narratives from the Western media aspect, especially as well, because I'm particularly uncomfortable with the way the BBCs of the world and the West and the Wall Street journals, etc., of the world are trying to spin this as anti-Muslim, because I don't think it's anti-Muslim. In fact, if anything, it's pro-minority in certain sense. Yes, you can say that the Muslims are not being included, but they're not being excluded because they do have a right to apply for citizenship if they are here living illegally. All they need to demonstrate is that they've been here since 11 years, and then they actually can go into the foreigners tribunal and then apply for citizenship. So that's the normal course of process. So Abhijit, we'll take the final comments from you, and then Charlotte, and then we'll say goodbye.
My final comments would be to quote Marx. Final comments are for fools who haven't said enough in their time.
All right.
I'm
Charlotte.
going to be really brief too. I just think that the one thing that's missing from Adit's summary is that this is not just a fast track to citizenship. It's also a lowering of the bar on documentation. And a lot of those that have sought refuge, and there are a number of Ahmadis that have, if they don't have the right documentation, which they're unlikely to have because they fled. And that this includes the Rohingyas as well, because we were talking Myanmar, it's another country too. So there's a whole other, we didn't go into the selectivity of the countries we could have. This is setting people up for being unable to move themselves out of their illegal immigrant status, and giving a fast track and a lower bar for documentation for a select group. So I find, therefore, that there is no other way to look at this act other than discriminatory. And you can argue that there are practical reasons why it is, there's historical reasons why it is, but I find this to be a difficult trend that the world is taking in the West as well, the America, the UK, which is less compassionate and less humane. And I worry as we move towards massive refugee crisis, climate change, everything that's going to cause massive waves of movement, that we are in an intolerant and hostile position at the moment. And are we going to be compassionate to our fellow human beings in years to come? And that's my concern.
Okay. Well, that's an opinion. But yeah, on that note, I think we're good to shut. Just wanted to put out a disclaimer. Any comments made during this FISI webinar or views expressed by individual speakers, such as Abhijit Iyer Mitra and Sohail Seth, not so much Charlotte, were at their own risk and not that of FISI UK. So thank you so much for joining in. Thank you so much for joining in. Abhijit, thanks again. Charlotte and Sohail, who's not here with us.
Hopefully see you soon physically.
Bye.
Take care.